Welcome back to The Explainer. Look, today we're doing something incredibly ambitious. We're going to literally reconstruct a coherent, start-to-finish map of the English literary tradition. If you've ever found yourself wanting to really grasp the deep underlying structures of the stories that literally built our modern world, well, you're in the right place. We're going to figure this whole thing out together. But first, we kind of have to take a hard look at how we actually read. See, on one hand, you've got reading for fun. It's a sprint, right? We pick up isolated random texts just to, become a bit more clever or have something interesting to say at a dinner party. Totally fine. But on the other hand, we have reading for formation. And this is no sprint. It's a slow, deliberate march. It's about training a mind that's grounded in tradition, cultivating a deep moral imagination, and treating literature as what it actually is, a cumulative, living, breathing conversation that's been going on across centuries, not just some random stack of books. And I have to give you a profound warning that comes with this type of study. I warn you, reading like this is going to change you in how you see the world we live in now. No joke, when you start tracking the mythology and the core symbols of a civilization, you begin to actually hear what that civilization is thinking. It's a deeply transformative insight, because this new literary literacy, it's going to make you see the modern world in a completely different light. You won't be able to unsee it.
So here's our literal map for today's explainer. We're going to cover the lost literary map, the epic, the lyric, drama, the novel, and finally, essays. Let's just dive right in.
Part 1. The Lost Literary Map.
So, over the last century or so, a lot of institutions actually abandoned their comprehensive reading lists, and that kind of left self-learners out in the cold without a structured guide. To recover this lost map, we have to trace genres vertically. Basically by following a single genre, like say the epic or the lyric, from its classical origins all the way to modernism, we literally get to watch the forms evolve. We witness firsthand how each generation makes it new, how they rewrite the generation that came right before them, and how these texts are actively talking to each other across thousands of years. It's like a giant puzzle coming together.
Part 2. Epic, Dreams of Civilization.
The epic is absolutely our first great pathway. By definition, these are massive, long narratives where a whole national or social imagination becomes solidified. When you sit down with an epic, you aren't just looking for a suspenseful plot. You are actively training your soul to think in these huge, sweeping arcs of fate, divine will, ultimate sacrifice, and the literal foundations of civilization itself. You are essentially decoding how an entire culture dreams itself into existence.
And it's just fascinating to watch this genre travel through time. Think about it. We start way back with the classical heroic codes of Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. Then, boom, we move into the medieval period with those chivalric romances like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, where it's all about testing a knight's inner virtue. After that, the English Renaissance completely perfects the form with John Milton's Paradise Lost. He literally swaps out battlefield glory for deep, cosmic, spiritual conflict. And finally, we hit the 20th century, where the epic just shatters into these modernist collages. You see this perfectly in T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which gives us this fragmented vision of a culture dealing with total spiritual collapse.
Part 3. Lyric, the intimate voice.
Okay, stepping away from the cosmic battlefield, we zoom all the way in and enter the lyric, the intimate, intensely private life of the soul. The lyric is, at its core, literature thinking aloud through feeling. And a fun fact, it actually gets its name from the lyre, that ancient musical instrument. That's a great reminder that to read lyric poetry properly, you absolutely must slow down and listen to it. You have to really observe the punctuation and sit with those generous moments of silence to truly track these enactments of a mobile consciousness.
Tracing the lyric vertically is basically tracking a continuous experiment in human emotion. We start out with the biblical Psalms and Sappho's classical fragments, which are all about profound intimacy, lament, and praise. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and poets introduce this crazy metaphysical wit. Seriously, reading John Donne is literally like playing a high-stakes game of chess with the poet. Next, you have the Romantics, prophetic voices like William Blake and the incredibly musical John Keats, and they just explode with emotional insight and personal mythos. The Victorians then refine all of this with deep psychological intensity, which leads us straight into the high intellectual architecture of the modernists.
Part 4. Drama, Action, and Conflict.
Now, drama is an ancient, deeply primal expression born straight from ritual. It is a completely embodied art form.
It's literature made visual that literally assumes breadth. When you read a play, you can't just read the words, you have to imagine the physical bodies in space. Because in drama, character isn't revealed by some helpful narrator telling you what someone is thinking. No, character is revealed entirely by physical presence, by timing, and by action. It explores the conflict of the individual within society, tracing a line from Sophocles all the way to Shakespeare and well beyond.
By the time you hit the modern era, the stage fragments in some really fascinating ways. First, you have poetic drama, which basically returns to its ancient ritual roots with high seriousness. Think W.B. Yeats and T.S. Eliot. Then, especially in America, you get psychological realism with powerhouses like Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams, who paint these minimalist, sacred portraits of ordinary life. And then, you have the theater of the absurd. Playwrights like Samuel Beckett strip it all down and give us the pure spectacle of existential despair and menace. The genre literally reinvents itself perfectly to match all the anxieties of the 20th century.
Part 5. The novel, Ordinary Lives.
With the novel, which is our newest dominant narrative form, we boldly shift our focus far away from those cosmic, epic heroes. This is where ordinary lives, everyday individuals, and domestic consciousness finally take center stage and become the worthy subjects of art. It's the genre that really trains our moral imagination. It teaches us how to judge, how to forgive, and ultimately, how to better understand the people we actually live with every day.
But here's the thing. Because the novel is so expansive, navigating it requires a totally different kind of patience. First, you have to just let the world slowly build around you. Give it time. Second, endure and maintain your attention. If your mind wanders, no big deal. Just go back and read the paragraph again. And third, you have to look beyond just the basic plot to see how time works and really focus on how the character's memory and consciousness unfold scene by scene.
When you trace the novel vertically, you watch it absolutely explode in the 18th century with the realistic travel narratives of someone like Daniel Defoe. From there, it twists into the dark, deeply psychological Gothic romances of writers like Mary Shelley and the Bronte sisters. And finally, it weaves into the massive, incredibly deep social critiques and moral webs of Victorians like Charles Dickens and George Eliot. They were essentially using the novel to ask the ultimate question: how do we actually live meaningful lives within such complex social environments?
Part 6. Essays, the intellectual backbone. If you're someone who enjoys philosophy and the history of ideas, this final path is for you. It's the intellectual engine of the entire literary canon. An essay is, at its core, a highly disciplined form of a person just thinking their thoughts aloud in carefully worded ways. When you read a great essay, you are literally tracking an argument as a pure flowing path of thought. You get to see how the sentences work almost like riverbanks, channeling the mind's ideas into a beautifully structured, logical argument.
This genre basically acts as a conversational history of ideas, showing us exactly how writers think about writing and art. You can trace aesthetics starting from Aristotle's classical poetics, running through the critical prefaces of Alexander Pope in the 18th century, all the way up to the 20th century critical frameworks of brilliant minds like Virginia Woolf and T.S. Eliot. In fact, these are the very essays that professionalized the modern study of English and gave us the actual vocabulary we use to understand the art we consume today.
All right. As we wrap up this map, I want to ground us with a hard but honestly very liberating truth. You are going to die not having read everything you quote-unquote should have read. And you know what? That is completely okay. Please don't just mindlessly check books off a list. Be selective. Be deliberate. Let your own genuine desires guide you through these 5 living genres.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative question. How will you build your original relationship with the canon? It's your reading journey, and it's your mind to form. As William Blake once boldly said, you must drive your plow over the bones of the dead. But to do that, you have to be intimately familiar with the graveyard, right? So, pick a genre, grab a book, and begin your pilgrimage. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I seriously can't wait to see what you read next.